I never expected a stranger at my favorite coffee shop to notice something about me that even most people close to me never remembered. For years, my mornings followed the same pattern. I woke up, grabbed my jacket, walked 6 blocks from my apartment, and stopped at the small coffee shop near my office before starting another busy day. It was not an exciting routine, but it was familiar. As a 25-year-old freelance graphic designer, I spent most of my time working alone. My days were filled with computer screens, project deadlines, and quiet evenings at home. The coffee shop was one of the few places where I felt connected to the outside world, even if only for a few minutes. Every morning, I ordered the same drink, a medium iced vanilla latte with an extra shot of espresso and just a little less ice. It was such a specific order that I sometimes wondered if the employees thought I was too predictable. But I liked knowing exactly what to expect. Then one Monday morning, everything changed. I walked into the shop and noticed a new face behind the counter. He looked around my age, maybe a little younger, with a friendly expression and the kind of calm energy that made the busy morning crowd feel less stressful. His name tag read Oliver. Since he was new, I expected the usual introduction. I expected to explain my order like I had done many times before. But before I could say anything, he looked up and smiled. Medium iced vanilla latte, extra espresso, less ice, right? For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. I looked at him and laughed softly. You already know my order? Oliver smiled and nodded. I have seen you come in almost every morning this week. I figured I should remember. It was such a simple sentence, but for some reason, it stayed in my mind. It was not because he remembered a coffee order. Anyone could memorize a list of drinks after enough time. It was because he noticed. In a world where everyone seemed busy and distracted, someone had paid attention to a small detail about my day. I took my coffee, thanked him, and went to my usual table near the window. But instead of opening my laptop immediately, I found myself thinking about that. Short conversation. I wondered why such a small gesture felt meaningful. Maybe because most days felt like they were moving too quickly. Maybe because I had become so used to being another person passing through that I forgot what it felt like to be recognized. Over the next few mornings, I started noticing Oliver more. He was not trying to impress anyone. He simply treated every customer with patience and kindness. He remembered names, listened to small stories, and made the coffee shop feel warmer than it had before. I still told myself it was just a normal interaction. A customer and a barista. Nothing more. But something about those ordinary mornings had started to feel different. I did not know it yet, but the person standing behind that coffee counter was about to become someone who would change the way I looked at connection, routine, and the unexpected moments that make life meaningful. After that first morning with Oliver, I expected everything to return to normal. I thought the moment would simply become another small memory from my daily routine, something I would forget after a few days. But the strange thing about small moments is that sometimes they stay with you longer than the big ones. The next morning, I walked into the coffee shop at the same time as always, and I immediately noticed Oliver behind the counter. He looked up, smiled, and greeted me like we had already known each other for much longer than a few days. Good morning, Noah. The usual. Hearing my name surprised me almost as much as him remembering my drink. I had never told him my name. I looked at his name tag and laughed. How did you know my name? Oliver pointed toward the small receipt on the counter. Your name was on your payment profile yesterday. I just happened to notice it. Again, it was a simple explanation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. But Oliver had a way of making ordinary details feel meaningful. During the next few weeks, our conversations slowly became part of my morning routine. At first, they lasted only a minute or two. He would ask how my work was going, and I would ask how his first weeks at the coffee shop were going. Eventually, those short conversations became something I looked forward to. I learned that Oliver had recently moved to the neighborhood and was trying to build a new routine. He had always enjoyed working with people because he liked creating small moments that made someone's day better. That idea stayed with me because it was exactly what he was doing without even realizing it. He was not trying to become important in my life. He was simply being thoughtful. One morning, I arrived at the coffee shop after a difficult night of working on a design project. I had spent hours trying to finish a client presentation, and I felt exhausted before the day had even started. When Oliver handed me my drink, he noticed my expression. "Long night?" he asked. I nodded and told him about the project. Instead of giving a quick response, he actually listened. He told me that creative work could be difficult because people often only saw the final result, not all the effort behind it. It was a small conversation, but it made me feel understood. On my way to work that morning, I realized something had changed. I was no longer visiting the coffee shop only because of the drink I ordered. I was going because I enjoyed the feeling of being welcomed. I enjoyed the few minutes when my day slowed down. I enjoyed talking with someone who seemed genuinely interested in the person behind the order. Still, I reminded myself that Oliver was simply a friendly barista. I did not want to create a story in my head that was not real. I had spent enough time living inside my own thoughts, and I knew how easy it was to misunderstand a situation when you wanted something to mean more. So I continued my mornings the same way. I walked in, ordered my coffee, and shared a few minutes of conversation with Oliver. But deep down, I knew something had changed. My predictable routine no longer felt empty. Somehow, a person I barely knew had made an ordinary part of my day feel a little more special. For a while, I convinced myself that my mornings had not really changed. I told myself that stopping by the coffee shop was still just a normal part of my schedule. I still woke up at the same time, walked the same 6 blocks, and ordered the same drink. But I eventually had to admit something to myself. The coffee was no longer the only reason I looked forward to those mornings. The conversations had become the part of the routine I remembered most. Oliver and I slowly moved beyond simple customer and barista conversations. We started talking about things that had nothing to do with coffee. Sometimes it was something small, like a movie we had recently watched or a restaurant we wanted to try. Other times, it was about our plans for the future and the things we hoped to accomplish. I learned that Oliver was someone who paid attention to the world around him. He noticed details that most people ignored. He remembered small comments people made and somehow brought them up later, making others feel like their words mattered. One morning, I mentioned that I was preparing a difficult design project for a client. I did not think much about it because it was just another challenge in my work life. A few days later, Oliver asked how the project was going. I was surprised because I had almost forgotten that I mentioned it. "You remembered that?" I asked. He smiled and said, "Of course. You seemed excited when you talked about it." That answer stayed with me. It was not about the project itself. It was about the fact that someone had noticed my excitement and remembered it. I realized how rare that feeling had become. Most conversations in my life were quick. People asked questions but were often waiting for their turn to speak. Oliver was different. He listened because he was genuinely interested. As the weeks passed, I started sharing more about myself. I told him about how I became a freelance designer, the challenges of working independently, and how sometimes I worried that I was not moving forward fast enough. Oliver never acted like he had all the answers. Instead, he offered simple thoughts that helped me see things differently. He reminded me that growth did not always happen in obvious ways. Sometimes progress was simply continuing even when things felt uncertain. Those conversations made me think about my own life. I had spent years creating a comfortable routine because it felt safe. Worked, went home, and repeated the same pattern every day. I never realized how much I had avoided unexpected connections because they felt unfamiliar. Oliver was showing me that not every change had to be uncomfortable. Some changes arrived quietly, through small conversations and simple moments. One afternoon, I stopped by the coffee shop later than usual because I had finished my work early. The place was less crowded, and Oliver was cleaning the counter before the evening rush. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "This is the first time I have seen you here outside your usual morning schedule." I laughed and told him that I had a little extra time that day. We talked longer than usual, and for the first time, I noticed that our conversation did not feel like part of a routine anymore. It felt like two people simply enjoying getting to know each other. As I walked home afterward, I found myself thinking about how strange life could be. Sometimes the people who make the biggest difference do not arrive with a dramatic moment. Sometimes they appear quietly, standing behind a coffee counter, remembering something as simple as your favorite drink. The more I got to know Oliver, the more I realized that the things I appreciated most about him were not the obvious ones. It was not just that he remembered my coffee order or asked about my projects. It was the way he made ordinary moments feel meaningful. He had a way of making conversations feel natural, like I did not have to prepare the perfect response or worry about saying the wrong thing. For someone like me, that was unusual. I had spent years being careful about what I shared with people. I was comfortable keeping my thoughts to myself and handling problems alone. But somehow, talking with Oliver made that habit easier to break. One morning, I arrived at the coffee shop and noticed that Oliver looked a little tired. Usually, he was the person who asked everyone else how their day was going. But that day, I decided to ask him first. "Busy week," I said. He looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. He told me that he had been adjusting to his new job and trying to balance work with his own personal goals. It was the first time I realized that I had been seeing only one side of him. I had always thought of Oliver as the person who listened, but he also had his own challenges and uncertainties. That conversation changed something between us. Felt more balanced. We were no longer just talking because he was serving coffee and I was ordering a drink. We were two people sharing pieces of our lives with each other. Over the next few days, our conversations became more personal. Oliver asked about why I chose graphic design, and I told him about how I had always enjoyed creating things but struggled with confidence. I explained that working alone gave me freedom, but sometimes it also made me feel disconnected. Oliver understood that feeling. He told me that many people focus so much on achieving their goals that they forgot how important connection was along the way. His words made me think about my own habits. I had always believed that a successful life was built around productivity. Finish the project. Meet the deadline. Complete the next goal. But Oliver reminded me that life was also about the moments between those achievements. The conversations. The friendships. The people who made ordinary days better. One Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. I walked into the coffee shop and saw that Oliver had already prepared my drink before I reached the counter. He placed it down with a smile and said, "I had a feeling you would need this today." I laughed and asked how he knew. He pointed at my expression and said, "You have the same look you had when you were stressed about that design project." I smiled because he was right. It was a small observation, but it showed how much attention he paid. On my way out, I found myself thinking about why those moments mattered so much. It was not because Oliver was doing anything extraordinary. It was because he made me feel noticed. In a world where everyone was often rushing from one thing to another, having someone remember the little details felt rare. I still did not know what our connection would become. I did not want to rush ahead or create expectations. But I knew one thing had changed. My mornings were no longer just about getting coffee before work. They had become a reminder that even the smallest interactions could bring something unexpected into your life. By the time spring arrived, the coffee shop had become more than just a place I visited before work. It had become a familiar part of my life, and Oliver had become someone I genuinely looked forward to seeing. I still found it surprising how naturally it happened. There was no single dramatic moment when everything changed. It was simply a collection of small conversations, shared laughs, and quiet moments that slowly built a connection. One afternoon, I finished a project earlier than expected and decided to stop by the coffee shop. It was not part of my usual morning routine, so I was not sure if Oliver would even be working. When I walked in and saw him behind the counter, his face immediately lit up with a smile. "This is unusual," he said. "You are here before the weekend rush." I laughed and told him that I finally had a little free time. Instead of making my usual quick order and leaving, I stayed for a while. The shop was calm, and we started talking about things we normally did not have time to discuss during busy mornings. Oliver told me more about his life before moving to the neighborhood. He explained that he had always enjoyed meeting new people, because everyone carried a different story that was worth hearing. I understood that better than anyone because I had experienced it myself. Before meeting him, I never thought a short conversation with someone behind a coffee counter could become something I valued so much. I shared more about my own life too. I told him about how working as a freelance designer could sometimes feel lonely. I loved creating things, but spending most days alone made it easy to forget how important human connection was. Oliver nodded because he understood that feeling. He said that sometimes people focus so much on building a future that they forgot to appreciate the present. That sentence stayed with me. It made me think about how often I rushed through my own days without really noticing them. After that conversation, our friendship started growing outside the usual coffee shop interactions. We occasionally talked about places we wanted to visit, foods we wanted to try, and simple things that made us happy. Everything felt easy and natural. There was no pressure to impress each other or pretend to be someone else. We were simply two people enjoying conversations and discovering how much we had in common. One morning, Oliver asked me about a sketchbook he had seen me carrying. I told him it was filled with design ideas and unfinished projects. He asked if he could see some of my work, and I hesitated at first. My designs were personal, and I was used to keeping them private until they were finished. But something about Oliver made me comfortable enough to share. He looked through the pages carefully and told me that he liked how much personality was behind each idea. It was a simple compliment, but it meant more than he probably realized. I had spent a long time questioning whether my work was good enough. Hearing someone appreciate the effort behind it reminded me that sometimes we are harder on ourselves than others are. As I walked away from the coffee shop that day, I realized something important. Oliver was no longer just someone who made my mornings better. He had become someone who reminded me to slow down, notice the world around me, and allow people into my life. I still did not know where this connection would lead, but for the first time in a long while, I was not trying to predict the future. I was simply enjoying the moments as they happened. For the first time in a long while, I started noticing how much a simple connection could change the way I experienced everyday life. Before Oliver came into my routine, I had become comfortable with keeping things predictable. I knew where I would be every morning, what I would order, and how most of my days would unfold. There was comfort in that pattern, but I never realized how much I had been missing until someone unexpected became part of it. As my friendship with Oliver grew, I began discovering more about the person behind the friendly smile at the coffee counter. He was not just someone who remembered details. He was someone who genuinely cared about the people around him. One afternoon, we talked about the things we wanted to accomplish in the future. I told him about my dream of creating a larger design portfolio and eventually working on projects that allowed me to be more creative. Oliver shared that he wanted to continue working with people because he enjoyed creating positive experiences, even through small interactions. He said that sometimes the smallest moments could have the biggest impact on someone's day. I immediately understood why he was so good at what he did. He believed every person had a story worth hearing. That conversation made me reflect on how differently I used to see my daily life. I used to think meaningful moments had to be big events. I thought important memories came from major achievements or life-changing decisions. But Oliver showed me that some of the best moments could happen during ordinary days. A short conversation. A familiar smile. Someone remembering something you said weeks ago. One morning, I arrived at the coffee shop feeling uncertain about a major decision for my career. I had received an opportunity to work with a new client, but I was worried because it required me to step outside my comfort zone. I mentioned it casually while waiting for my drink, expecting only a quick response. Instead, Oliver asked questions about why I was interested in the project and what made me hesitate. He listened carefully before saying something that stayed with me. He told me that sometimes the things we are most afraid to try are the same things that help us grow the most. It was not complicated advice, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Later that day, I accepted the project. I knew the decision was mine, but I also knew that our conversation gave me the confidence to move forward. That was when I truly understood the impact Oliver had on me. He was not changing my life for me. He was simply reminding me that I was capable of making my own choices. Over time, I noticed that I had changed in other ways too. I started reaching out to friends more often. I became more open to trying new experiences. I stopped seeing my routine as something that protected me and started seeing it as something that could expand. Oliver had entered my life through something as ordinary as a coffee order, but the connection we built became something much more meaningful. Still, I knew I needed to be honest with myself. The feelings I had developed were becoming stronger, and I began wondering whether Oliver saw our connection the same way. I did not want to assume anything. I did not want to misunderstand his kindness. But for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe this unexpected friendship had become something more than I originally imagined. And soon, I would find out whether Oliver felt the same way. For several days after that realization, I found myself thinking more carefully about my interactions with Oliver. I had spent so much time appreciating the way he made ordinary moments feel special that I had not stopped to consider what those feelings meant. I did not want to rush into assumptions. Oliver was naturally kind to people, and that was one of the qualities I admired most about him. The last thing I wanted was to mistake genuine kindness for something else. So I decided to simply continue being honest with myself and enjoy the connection we had built. One Friday morning, I walked into the coffee shop and immediately noticed something different. The usual morning crowd was smaller than normal, and Oliver was working at a quieter pace. When he saw me, he smiled and prepared my drink like always. But this time, instead of immediately returning to work, he stayed for a moment and asked how my week had been. I told him about the new design project I had accepted and how challenging but exciting it had been. Oliver looked genuinely happy for me. He reminded me that taking chances was part of growing, and I realized how much his encouragement had influenced me over the past few months. After I finished my coffee, I stayed a little longer than usual. We talked about our favorite places around the city, restaurants we wanted to visit, and simple things we enjoyed doing when we had free time. It felt natural, almost effortless. I noticed that with Oliver, I did not feel the need to carefully choose every word. I could simply be myself. That feeling was unfamiliar because I had spent years trying to present the most confident version of myself to others. With him, I did not feel like I had to prove anything. A few days later, something happened that made me realize Oliver might feel a similar connection. I came into the coffee shop after a stressful morning, and before I even reached the counter, Oliver noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled and told him it was just a busy day. He listened and reminded me that I did not always have to handle everything alone. It was a simple comment, but it made me pause. I had spent so much time learning how to be independent that I sometimes forgot allowing people to support me was also important. That afternoon, I thought about how much had changed since the day Oliver first remembered my order. At the beginning, he was just a new barista who noticed a small detail about a regular customer. Now, he was someone whose opinion mattered to me. Someone whose encouragement made difficult days easier. Someone who had become part of my life in a way I never expected. Still, there was one question I could not ignore. Did Oliver see me as just a friend who happened to visit his coffee shop every morning? Or did he feel the same connection I felt? I did not want to create pressure or change something that already meant a lot to me. But I also knew that pretending I felt nothing would not be honest. The next time I saw Oliver, I noticed he seemed slightly nervous. It was unusual because he was normally so comfortable talking with everyone. After our usual conversation, he smiled and asked if I had any plans for the weekend. I told him I was free. He looked thoughtful for a moment before saying there was something he wanted to ask me. Suddenly, the ordinary morning routine I had known for months felt completely different. I realized that sometimes the moments we remember most are the ones we never see coming. When Oliver told me there was something he wanted to ask, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. For months, our connection had grown through small conversations and simple moments, but this was the first time I felt like we were standing at the edge of something new. I reminded myself not to create expectations before hearing what he wanted to say. After all, one of the things I appreciated most about Oliver was how genuine he was. I did not want my own feelings to change the way I saw him. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes earlier than usual. I found Oliver organizing the counter before the morning crowd arrived. When he noticed me, he smiled, but I could tell he seemed slightly more nervous than normal. We exchanged our usual greetings, and he prepared my drink with the same careful attention he always showed. After handing it to me, he took a small breath and asked if I wanted to sit for a few minutes after he finished his shift. I agreed, trying not to overthink the moment. Later that afternoon, we sat at a small table near the window. The coffee shop was quieter, and the sunlight created a warm atmosphere around us. Oliver looked thoughtful before he finally spoke. He told me that he had enjoyed getting to know me over the past few months. He said he appreciated our conversations and the way we could talk about almost anything. Then he asked if I would like to meet him outside the coffee shop sometime, not as a customer and a barista, but simply as two people who enjoyed spending time together. For a moment, I did not know what to say, not because I was surprised that he asked, but because I realized how much I wanted to say yes. I smiled and told him that I would like that. Oliver looked relieved, and we both laughed because the moment felt much less complicated than we had imagined. Our first time spending time together outside the coffee shop was simple. We visited a small local bookstore, walked through a nearby park, and talked about things we had never had enough time to discuss during busy mornings. Without the familiar counter between us, I discovered even more about Oliver. I learned about the experiences that shaped him, the things he valued, and the reasons he cared so much about making people feel noticed. I also shared more about myself. I talked about my fears of taking risks, my habit of overthinking decisions, and how meeting him had changed the way I viewed everyday connections. Oliver listened the same way he always had, with patience and genuine interest. That was when I understood something important. What made our connection meaningful was not a single moment or a dramatic change. It was the consistency of the small things, the conversations, the encouragement, the feeling that we could both be ourselves without trying to impress each other. As the weeks passed, our relationship continued to grow naturally. We took things slowly and allowed ourselves to enjoy learning more about each other. I no longer saw my mornings at the coffee shop as a simple routine. They had become the beginning of a friendship that taught me to be more open, more present, and more willing to welcome unexpected moments into my life. Looking back, I realized that Oliver never changed my life by doing something extraordinary. He changed it by paying attention to the ordinary things that most people overlooked. And sometimes, those small moments are exactly what make life unforgettable. Looking back at how everything started, I still find it hard to believe that such an important connection began with something as simple as a coffee order. At the time, I thought my daily routine was just a series of repeated actions. Wake up, walk to the coffee shop, order the same drink, and begin another busy day. I never expected that one small interaction would remind me how meaningful ordinary moments could become. Oliver entered my life quietly. He did not arrive with a dramatic story or a life-changing announcement. He simply remembered a small detail about me when I thought I was just another customer passing through. That simple act showed me something I had forgotten. Everyone wants to feel noticed. Everyone wants to know that they matter, even in small ways. Over time, Oliver and I built something meaningful through patience and genuine conversations. What made our connection special was not one single event. It was the collection of small moments that happened naturally. The mornings when he asked about my projects. The afternoons when we talked about our goals. The conversations where we both felt comfortable sharing parts of ourselves that we usually kept private. Through knowing Oliver, I learned that connection does not always happen in the moments we expect. Sometimes it appears in the middle of a normal day when we are not looking for anything different. Before meeting him, I believed my routine was protecting me. I thought keeping life predictable was the easiest way to avoid disappointment. But Oliver showed me that being comfortable and being truly happy were not always the same thing. Sometimes growth requires allowing something new into your life. Our relationship continued to develop naturally. We kept discovering new things about each other and creating memories beyond the coffee shop where we first met. We explored different parts of the city, shared our favorite places, and supported each other through everyday challenges. The most important thing was that neither of us had to pretend to be someone else. We could simply be honest. I also realized that Oliver had changed the way I looked at other people. Before, I often moved through my days without paying much attention to the strangers around me. Now, I noticed the small details. I noticed when someone needed a little encouragement. I noticed the value of listening. I noticed how a simple kind action could completely change someone's day. Oliver reminded me that kindness does not have to be grand to be powerful. Sometimes remembering a name, asking a question, or showing genuine interest can create a connection that lasts much longer than expected. Years later, I still think about those first mornings at the coffee shop. I think about the person I was before Oliver entered my life and the person I became afterward. I was not transformed into someone completely different. Instead, I became more open, more confident, and more willing to embrace unexpected moments. The biggest lesson I learned was that life is often changed by the smallest details. A familiar smile. A thoughtful question. A person who takes the time to remember something about you. Sometimes the people who become important to us begin as complete strangers. Sometimes the most meaningful stories start in the most ordinary places. For me, it started with a coffee shop, a simple routine, and a new barista who reminded me that being seen is one of the most valuable feelings in the world.